All right, we're here today with Pete Coviello. How you doing?
I'm very well. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right, thank you. We're going to talk
right.
about your upcoming book on Vineland, which I'm very excited about. But before we get into it, I want to know how you discovered Pynchon.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, as you know, like a lot of people would be, there's a certain kind of dude who would like push Pynchon on you, you know, and as a kind of dude who like knew a lot and had a lot of information and things like that. And those were not always my dudes, you know. So I was sort of wary. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like there's a certain quality of like a very dudeish delectation around Pynchon that was not really my thing. And so, you know, you heard of him because you're in school and you're reading things. But then like after graduation, a clutch of my friends had moved to Chicago. I'd moved away and I came back and I got to see them. And that was a tremendous joy, you know, in the way of being 23 and seeing your friends that you haven't seen for a year. So you're drunk all the time and you're just very happy to see each other. And what I realized was that these set of friends like John and Laura and Enrique had all been reading this one book. And that book was Vineland. And they just were delighted by it in the way that you'd be delighted by like a record. You know what I mean? Like they just wanted to talk about it and they wanted to fight about what was best and what like track was coolest. And I was like, all right. And so the first Pynchon, I think the first Pynchon I ever read was Vineland, which was just shattering to me, not because I understood it or anything. I just thought it was so funny. Yeah. I just could not like, there's not a book that I'd read that I'd laughed so hard and so like self-endangeringly, like I thought I was going to rupture something internal, you know? And then after I read that, I read The Crying of Lot 49, which is, of course is smaller and easier to digest and then funny. And then I read back to Vineland and then it sort of like lifted off from there. But Vineland was really my first immersive experience. And that was really with a handful of other people, you know, and it was a sort of like way to stay close to them.
Oh, that's awesome. And I love how you say it's like getting into music and stuff, which you point out in the book a couple times.
Yeah, totally. It was very much like, you know, like you fight about a record that came out. And this was like 94. We had lots of records to fight about, 23 years old as we were, you know?
What sort of stuff were you listening to?
Oh my God. So it's 94. So we would have definitely been like the like demographically predictable indie rock kids that you'd imagine. Like we were definitely listening to like Helium and Pavement and stuff like that. But we were in Chicago. So there was a scene, sort of like the Bloodshot Records scene, which was an insurgent country scene, like the Meat Purveyors and John Langford and the Pine Valley Cosmonauts and Robbie Fulks and stuff like that. So we were also the young, very young Nico Case. So that was the sort of world that we were sort of, I don't know, drunkenly strolling around in back then, you know?
And Lounge Acts was going at that time, right?
The Lounge Acts was completely going at that time. Oh my God, that was it's exactly right. That was the era of the great shows at the Lounge Acts. Like Superchunk has always been a tremendous favorite of mine. I believe that I saw in 98, maybe. Like the most 90s show I ever saw was Neutral Milk Hotel opening for Superchunk, which is like, it's, again, like demographically ridiculous, but it was at Lounge Acts and it was a great joy.
Nice.
Yeah.
So when did you hit the big Pynchon novels?
Oh man, that's a good question. Probably, yeah, that's a very good question because I devoured Mason and Dixon when it came out because how could I not? Like I study 18th and 19th century American literature and the book was just like designed in a lab to produce my joy. You know what I mean? It's like a fever dream of all the great dissertations that were never written about 18th century America. So I just devoured that when it came out and just wanted more of it. And it was probably around then. It had to have been either right before or right after that I finally read Gravity's Rainbow, which was certainly the last. Like I'd read V before that and everything like that. And I'd even read the collection of Juvenilia before that. And I finally read Gravity's Rainbow. And I'm glad that I didn't go to it first. I'm glad I had a little more patience for its stoner comedy and stuff like that, as well as its like incredible synthesizing historical vision.
Well, we approached it in the exact opposite way. I started with Gravity's Rainbow, and it was kind of like once you've been through part one of Gravity's Rainbow, you feel like you can do anything.
Yeah, man, it's true. You've run that particular kind of marathon. Yeah, no, I don't know that I could have. I don't know that I would have been ready enough for it. Don't know that its density would have carried me along. But like, I developed a real taste just for the particular quality of the sentences. You know, that like ornate Jamesian syntax wedded to like slangy profanity to the slapstick. And once you get seduced by that, it can keep you afloat through a lot of things, you know?
Oh yeah.
And then I was just hooked. Then everything afterwards, then Against the Day, everything like that. I just wanted, you know, more and more. Also because I'd read that first book with those friends of mine, it was just like a way of being close to them, because something would come out and we would all get it. And then, you know, we didn't live near each other. It was just a sort of way to be close to those bygone friends, you know?
I think that's such an important aspect of literature and art in general, which you talk about in the book a lot, which is great. Because I mean, most works of criticism don't really deal with that. But the fact that, you know, these are integral parts of our lives that, you know, connect us to other people is a truly wonderful thing.
Yeah, man, they're like records in that, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure other people grew up with greater articulacy and greater emotional maturity than I did, but like talking about things like bands and books and records was, for me certainly, and for a lot of my friends, like the way we figured out how to love each other and how to tell each other that we loved each other by sustaining these like escalatingly inane conversations over decades, you know? Yeah. And Pynchon for me was, you know, for better or worse for him, was really at the center of those, you know, as much as a Nico Case record or anything like that. Yeah.
You mentioned the sentences, and you mentioned this in your book as well, but I remember when I was reading Gravity's Rainbow for the first time, I was posting on Live Journal about it just because I had so many thoughts, you know, when you're covering this whole new world.
Totally.
And a complete stranger commented that they often they have it on their shelf, and often they'll just take it down, open the book at random, and read a page just to marvel at the beauty of the prose.
Yeah. There's if you develop a taste for that particular combination of that sort of like outblown syntax with like agility around slanginess, or just the like quotidianness of daily speech, that can just seduce you all the time. In my worst days, you know, like when I had bad times, I would go back to Vineland because it was so funny, kind of like a kid with a bedtime story, you know what I mean? Like just to be comforted by this particular passage that I knew was coming, or just to be comforted by this set of sentences that I knew could deliver its reliable charge.
I've often said that when you're pressed for time, I wish there was like a pill you could take that could compress all the feelings of a novel into like, you know, 3 minutes for a pop song, and you can just experience it, you know, when you really need it.
Get up to Northern California, there's got to be some tech guys working to expropriate that knowledge. It's just like the pill version. Come on, you gotta think there's some startup funding in that, you know what I mean? Yeah, totally. Those are totally the, you know, the people who would have been like working at Yoyodyne Technologies, and they're definitely still there in San Narciso, making the pill that will digest the whole novel for sure.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite of his works?
Oh man, see, it's funny you should ask. There's a very, very brilliant writer and critic named Joshua Clover, who I write about a lot in the book, who I think is just an extraordinarily gifted poet and writer, and a real fan of Pynchon. We were once in a bar, I don't remember where, and we were doing the game, like, list your favorite novels. And I remember him just looking at me like, it's amazing, yours are in exact reverse order of what they should be. But I think for me, they're probably, Vineland I'm always going to cherish, though I would not harbor I wouldn't venture the claim that it's the best. Mason and Dixon is, for a lot of reasons, the most delighting to me. Vineland is never going to not be up there with me. The synoptic view of fascism as comporting with, rather than a departure from capitalism, that is Gravity's Rainbow, have to think a lot with too. I'm also, because, you know, you can teach it a lot, I'm a real sucker for the crying of Lot 49, even though Pynchon would himself sort of think somewhat less of it. And, you know, Inherent Vice is amazing. Yeah. You know, it's sort of another California book. That's delightful. And there are, Against the Day is a big baggy mess, but there are passages of it that are just sublime and stuff like that.
Oh man, that's
So,
my favorite novel of all time.
Against the Day, for
yeah,
real?
I love it.
See, you would be with my friend Clover. He was like, yeah, it's Graham's Rainbow Against the Day. What the fuck is... Anyway, it's fine. Yeah, you can have your, yeah. I think you are not alone in that opinion. Yeah.
I mean, it's just so sprawling, but a lot more accessible than Gravity's Rainbow.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, yeah. And the falling of the Campanile in Venice, and the what is it, the event in, where is it in Russia?
Chernobyl that he...
The Tungutskin event or something like that. I've lost myself in the...
that he calls the star Chernobyl, that event that you could see all over the world. That was,
Yeah. It's all very amazing. The Mexican Revolution, yeah.
And stuff like more... the Russian rival leader, air balloon leader to the Chums of Chance is named Pajitnov, and all the Tetris references where he's dropping bricks 4x4.
Yeah,
wonderful.
Yeah. I read Bleeding Edge when it came out too. Bleeding Edge is probably the only one that I haven't gone back to reread, which maybe I will at some point. But it's odd in being like a contemporary historical fiction in that, So that was remarkable in its way. A good New York book.
And yeah, having Thomas Pynchon talk about Britney Spears was it's something I was like, yeah.
Yeah, it's true. There's some Stevie Nicks appears in the book someplace, and I was like, all blessings. Happiness has arrived, Yeah, that was very pleasing. Yeah, but I think for me it would still be I'm just a tremendous sucker for Mason and Dixon and just the labors of craft involved in tuning that sensibility, that sentence-wide sensibility that we're talking about, to the rigors of 18th century prose. It was just a great delight. Also a very tender-hearted book,
Yeah.
Like a book about friendship. Yeah, a book about like Vineland in that way. Like it's a book on the one hand about like intimate life and friendship, but also about like the seizure of the planet by Enlightenment rationality and its attachment to things like colonial expropriation and slavery. Like those, like the holding together of books that are historically exacting and critical and grim with like humane comedy. That's kind of the thing that I will always cherish in Pynchon, and then I think Vineland, for all of its stoner messiness, also does. That would be my deep claim for Vineland,
Oh yeah, it's probably the funniest. It's very funny no matter what, but it's also very heartfelt.
Yeah, for real. Like a book that manages to combine that degree of like political grief, like sorrow over the vanishing of a world of like insurgent mobilizations, while remaining like unfalteringly comic. You know what I mean? Like when I think of when I tell students like Moby Dick is a comic novel about annihilation. Like this is a book that wants to be basically comic about like the seizure of American politics by counterinsurgent reaction, and that's a pretty potent 1990 forecasting, of the whatever the neoliberalism to come. So I'll still, for all of my admitting that it's messy and stonerish and slapstick, I will make strong cases for it just the same.
I love to, start in your book and, seeing the phrase spectacularly fucking funny.
Yeah, that's like you don't want to sell that out. Like whatever you're going to say about Pynchon, whatever you're going to say about entropy, whatever you're going to say about its like madcap referentiality, I don't think you want to lose track of the part that like a lot of it is just like slapstick stoner silliness, like the checks in the mayo line. You know what I mean? Like just stuff like that. Like he's turning sentences in part for the delight that can be kindled in them, and I don't think displacing that does a particularly good service to what Pynchon is after, or what he produces.
And my favorite, the funniest part of Pynchon is always, whenever I see this phrase, it just delights me, is a great nation pursued its war on a botanical species.
Yeah. I find I would follow my friend John. Like we had a lot of debates in the way of young people, like what's our favorite scene, and John's was always my beloved friend John Doerr out here in Chicago. His was always the scene when Zoid is set up and they've got like this enormous block, like 7 hay bales of pressed marijuana that somehow got inside his little bungalow. There it stood mysteriously, like, you know, that he just finds everything about that scene. He finds delightful, you know, and the neighbors are all watching it like, what the fuck? It's good.
And moments later, it was outside again.
It's outside the house, and no one knows how it got in it. You know, the phrase is something like ready to be hauled back to whatever spacious museum of drug abuse it had been borrowed from. Yeah, very strong. Very strong.
So what are some of your favorite comic moments?
Oh my God. So there's that one. There really is just like the offhand stuff, like when Zoid's daughter, Prairie, who I still think of as like my representative in the novel, the beginning of the novel, she's working at Bodhi Dharma Pizza, which he describes as like Zoid's mind. It's like, it's the California pizza concept gone terribly wrong. And he gives you like a paragraph describing the awfulness of this particular version of Californianized pizza. I find that immensely delightful. I find the checks in the mayo moment immensely delightful. There's more like tender-hearted comic ones, like in the final, like the symphonic concluding chapter, we greet the Thanatoids, who are like the people who cannot advance into death, many of them Vietnam vets, many of them wounded from the 60s. And they're all being awoken by spirits awake, you know? Oh, yeah. And that's a very, 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 very moving moment to me. It's like comic and like, and you know, without giving too much away to people who haven't read the novel, like in its climactic moment, the phrase is, "But I'm your father." I mean, holy shit. That's very, very funny. That's very funny in a novel that takes place, you know, where whatever Return of the Jedi was filmed. That's just very, that's slaying to me. The takeover of the flight, the Kahuna Airlines.
That was nuts.
Totally nuts. And it's Zoid's gig. Zoid is playing a keyboard on an in-flight band for flights that go from LA to Hawaii, mostly inhabited by people looking to escape their bad marriages in Los Angeles and have a vacation in Hawaii. So good. Yeah. All this stuff I just couldn't quite believe was, you know, I understood myself when I was 23 or whatever to be reading a serious novel, and that a serious novel would expend itself so much in like stoner inventiveness and slapstick comedy was kind of amazing to me. It was just kind of like, you know, like when the boys in Billy Barf and the Vomitones become Gino and the Paisans and play at the mafia wedding. I was incredibly seduced by that, you know?
Yeah.
I had a real weakness for it.
And I love just how much he, like the check is in the mayo is forced, but there's something I love about that, just getting in funny moments as much as you can.
Yeah.
And like there's other examples like in Bleeding Edge, do you remember the those meddling kids joke? What he's talking about.
I do not.
He's talking about like Scooby goes Central America or something like that, but he references Median Colombia, which doesn't work if you say it out loud, but I still think there's something really wonderful that he just got that joke in there.
Like the refusal as like high art and serious political thinker, the refusal to disavow the lowest of low forms, like the pun and the slapstick joke and the stupid song, like, and the willingness to sort of fold that into a synthesizing and like political version of the world is a great gift unto us. You know what I mean? Like a commitment to the comic that does neither forswear, as like a commitment to just like clear-eyed critique of empire. Those two things don't always go together with that kind of aplomb and grace.
Yeah. And in Gravity's Rainbow, the various CIAs were wonderful as well. Like the Committee for Incandescent Novels.
Yeah.
Just...
I mean, all part of the the Gravity's Rainbow is the one it took me, I will say, you did better. It took me the longest to sort of like come into relation to it as, it's a book that's like producing all these things, but it wants to make an argument about the continuity between international capital and fascism, as against the tendency to think of fascism as like the, the anomaly, the thing that broke off from. No. It's an entire novel, entire like lunatic novel about their like co-articulation. That took me, man, that, again, there are a lot of smarter readers than I am. Took me a long time to come around to that. And then it just started crackling with a different sort of clarity,
Yeah, the whole Byron the Bulb story is one of my favorite things in all literature. And like, it's ridiculous, but then again, it's based in fact about the, the Phoebus cartel, but it's, this immortal light bulb telling his story.
There's a version of that too, the wonderful passage in, what do you call it, Mason and Dixon, where he's thinking about the clocks, where the clocks speak to one another and things like that. One of the things I wish I had a better talent for writing about is Pynchon's attunement. It makes me think of a poet like, I don't know, Elizabeth Bishop, his wonderful attunement to animals, to dogs. Like there's the Desmond, the lost dog in Vineland, who keeps coming back and gets, in fact, the final scene. He has a wonderful attunement to like the dog's eye view of the world, which gets like its most comic expression in the Learned English Dog. Like at the beginning of Mason and Dixon, there's a dog that talks because of course there is in the Age of Wonders, and he says, of course, potently, Mason asks, well, may I see your master? And he says, I'm a British dog, sir. No man owns me. Like just a very, like again, a slapstick way to start up the entire question about empire that's going to run through the whole book. Yeah.
And Pugnax in It Against the Day, the Chums is, it was great.
Yeah.
His diet.
That's right. Oh my God. Yeah. Man, that's a book I think I read it when it first came out, and then I read it again, and I was like, whoa, and I haven't gone back to that either. Maybe in this season of quarantine and closure, would be a good time to read those, 1,400 pages again.
Yeah. The audiobook is wonderful as well. Dick Hill does an excellent
far out,
job.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it's 53 hours. But it's
Whoa.
worth it.
Whoa, have you done other Pynchon audiobooks? Like I wonder if there must be. Someone must be out there having read Vineland or something like that.
Vineland just came out this year, I believe. And Mason and Dixon is now out, but when I wanted the audiobook, I had to do a interlibrary transfer to get 20 cassettes of it. And this was like in 2009 or something. So like, I had to then go find a tape player, and then I digitized them.
Oh, that's amazing.
But
that's completely, it's funny. I have not looked into that even in the least.
Yeah, I think most of them are in audiobook form, and I think I've listened to them all, except for me.
Oh, that's great. It's funny, at the very beginning of the pandemic, like the book was done and I'd done the copy edits, and I was like, I'm gonna go back and read V. I haven't read that in a while. And that had its own sort of pleasure. I read that along with his introduction to another Cornell novel, that had been down so long it looks like Up to Me, which is a sweet introduction. His introduction is very, 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 it's a heartbreaker.
Because they were friends, and like Gravity's Rainbow is dedicated to.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful book, though. I want to revisit that one.
That is, that's the sort of thing that like I don't know. Again, I right at the beginning of the book that I know Pynchon is a man in his 80s now. It's unreasonable to hope for more novels. Whatever the case, my deep hope is that, like, I got a bunch of people in New York who are like proximate to him because they have kids the same way, or they know his agent/wife, or they work for him at Penguin and stuff like that. And I would love to get him a copy of the book for no other purpose than to be like, dude, this is just a fan's notes. Like, you have given me greatly more than I could have asked for from any particular object or artist. And part of what it's given me is like a way to be held together with the people who are dearest to me, with my friends from forever. And it's a expression of tremendous gratitude.
Yeah, you totally should. It's a lovely name.
Yeah, I don't know. You gotta imagine the guy gets a lot of that, is what I would think.
So let's talk about your book. How did this whole idea come about?
Oh, well, so the good people at Columbia University Press, and I was working particularly with a man named Nicholas Dames, who's a lovely, lovely dude. He and Jane Davidson decided they wanted to start a series, and they wanted it to be modeled on, like the 33 1/3 series?
Yeah, I love those.
Yeah, right. So they're all about like people writing about albums that move them a lot, and writing in like a vernacular idiom, like writing for, you may have liked this book too, here's a story about it. And they wanted to do that for single novels. And Nicholas wrote to me, I don't know, some time ago, and was like, hey man, would you be interested in this? And I was like, you know, I was writing a couple other books, but then I just sent something off. I was like, you know what novel I think about a lot? I think a lot about Vineland. And so I sent him, he's like, oh, we'd love that. We'd love that. We'd love that. If you get it done, it could be the inaugural. So I was like, all right. So I'd finished this other academic book about like 19th century sexuality and the Mormons. And I was like, I got a summer. I'm going to go hard at this book. And so I spent 6 months writing this book. And the point was really, which I appreciated a lot, like the 33 and a third books, not to not be critical, not to not have thoughtful things to say, but to do it in like a vernacular way that like a generalist reader might be interested in. And getting to do that appealed to me a lot. So that's how I started writing the book. And then of course I had to figure out, okay, the fuck do I want to say about it? How do I want to arrange it? And so we came upon like writing over different years of encounter, from being a kid, from being a slightly less stupid kid, to being a person alive in the like War on Terror or Bush era until now. So those are the 4 scenes of readerly uptake, and in 4 different ways of taking up the book.
And you also wrote an article recently.
Yeah.
Review.
Yeah. So I've been writing, you know, I sort of write these other sorts of pieces, and I was like, okay, well, this summer, as you know, was one of people thinking a lot about what the police are. And Pynchon has a lot to say about the police. Indeed, in Vineland, he has a line about there's a character, a very sort of apolitical character named Weed Atman, who's a math professor, and it's 1969, and he wanders into a protest where the cops have been called, and the cops are just beating the shit out of some college kid. And he just, like in very unornate sentences, no one was stopping them. He watched this. And and Pynchon says the true nature of the police was being revealed to him. And the book, like Vineland, is very much a lot about like what happened to the literally armed struggles of the 60s. Well, they were crushed by an armed struggle on the other side, like a counterinsurgent mobilization that we like to call the police or the security state. And it seemed to me like, oh, as we were watching, like, I don't know, one afternoon I went to one of my protests in Chicago, and there were more riot cops than I'd ever seen in any one place. And it was fucking terrifying because I was there with my friends and the people I believe in to protest. And we were like, well, if they want to kick the shit out of us, they will. And indeed they did it to others at the park. Anyway, all of which is to say, I was like, wow, I have this book about Pynchon that I've been thinking a lot about. And I think this book thinks a lot about the routing of American languages of freedom through the idiom of security and the sacralization of police power. Yeah, I got something to say about that. So I wrote this little piece this summer that was both about the book that's about to come out, Vineland, but also about its relevance toward this moment of like police counterinsurgency that was this summer. And that was fun. That was good to do. I got a lot of nice, got a lot of warming response from the world, Yeah. And it was good to be able to mobilize Pynchon in that context, because like career-wide anti-fascist is another thing you could say about Thomas Pynchon, along with like brilliant comedian and maker of sentences, like career-wide anti-fascist. So that was good. That was fun.
And Violent is so underappreciated, I think is probably the right word. Like it kind of gets lost in comparison to the huge ones.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I was young. I can remember it coming out because I had this friend, who bought it because he was all into Gravity's Rainbow and Pynchon and stuff like that. And he was really smart. But I can remember I was 18, 19 when it comes out, and people just being like, this is not what was expected after Gravity's Rainbow. You know what I mean? Just like comic romp about the 60s. I think it was partially not what was expected because I think people had heard of something like Mason and Dixon being in the works, which is of course a very different novel. And so I can sort of understand the ways that it read weirdly, though I was no real part of that. My sense is that it's like nothing is going to make it less messy and less slapstick, but I think its reputation is going to rise and solidify because it's an incredibly smart book about the seizure of American power by police reaction. And it thinks of the 60s, again, not as like a moment of inauguration or anything, but of one of like clarification and solidification. And I think that's not going to go away, and people will find in Vineland a resource for thinking about like, oh my God, what happens in the exchange between like anti-fascist social movements and the police? Vineland's got a lot to say about that, you know.
It does, yeah.
And I think it would not surprise me if it got taken up more. Not only because it like recurs in Inherent Vice and its characters show up in, of course, Against the Day is like the Traverses, our family that inaugurates itself in.
When I realized that it was the same genealogical line, it was just such a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, from that great story that gets told initially in Vineland about the IWW and the labor activism, you know. So yeah, I have no difficulty imagining that Vineland will be a book that gets taken up in terms other than those of like, what a weird exception, you know?
Yeah.
But we'll see.
We talked about some of your favorite comic moments, but what are some of your favorite moments in general? Like not just in Vineland, but through all of Pynchon. Like,
oh, geez, there's a lot that I will never not be a sucker for the talking dog. I will never not be a sucker for the passages of Mason and Dixon that take place in Philadelphia when like a revolution is fomenting in a still slave holding country. My God, though, in Vineland, there's just an awful lot of them, like the evocation of the street battle in Berkeley where DL finds Frenessy is very moving and very beautiful to me. The occasional passages where the novel allows itself to wax lyrical about what it's like to be not just in a protest, but a protest that's turned into a street battle, to be engaged in like anti-state militancy with your people. Like, it has a very moving to me vision that it wants to cling to of what like being a part of insurrectionary movements might be like. I think that's super valuable. And then there's all those like sweethearted moments. There's one moment I've never gotten over where the novel describes to us Zoid, like hapless stoner Zoid, unhealed, heartbroken Zoid, when Prairie is born. Remember this?
Part of a tab of acid.
He's taking it, exactly. He's like, there's a sweet moment where Zoid is anxious about his baby being born, so he's taken a tab of acid to watch her being born. And she's born, and she looks at him with what he is certain is a look of recognition, like, "Oh, you again." Yeah. And that's the moment that sustains him through the difficulties of single parenthood, the difficulties of catch as catch can life in Northern California. There's a great phrase where Pynchon says something like, it's a moment he had to go back to when life was falling apart, when the Klingons are closing and the warp engine's out of control, you know? Yeah. And it's such a sweet moment that routs this grown-up poignancy through the pop culture detritus of Zoid's mind, and does so with absolute tender regard for Zoid. Yeah. You know? That's what I'd say, I guess. The moments of like a knock on Pynchon, which I understand but sort of don't take as seriously as others, is that, well, he doesn't really have human characters. He's sort of cartoonish, or he's sort of cold. I think that's wrong. Yeah. But one of the things I'd say about Vineland is that Vineland sustains this wonderful tenderness of regard toward even the most cartoonish characters. And Zoid is only part of that, you know? He doesn't always succeed in getting everyone as in focus as everyone else, but the moments of tenderness really land for me.
I mean, there's just so many characters. I mean, criticism of that Against the Day, I don't agree with, because there's like at least a dozen main characters who he does delve into their lives and what they're going through. Yeah. But, you know, you can't go through that with every character in the book.
I mean, some of what that's about, and I write about this at the end of the Vineland book, some of what that's about is like, Pynchon is not like, if you go to a Pynchon novel wanting the 19th century novel and its technologies of characters to just be reproduced for you, yeah, you're going to be fucking frustrated. in part because it seems to me that Pynchon loves the 19th century novel. Like a person who names his narrator Wick's Cherry Coke is not a person whose love of Dickens is much in question. So he loves the 19th century novel, but not in a complacent or imitative way. He also thinks of the 19th century novel as something like complicit in the horrors of the Enlightenment. Like he thinks of the novel itself as a stepchild of the Enlightenment, along with enslavement and capitalization and enclosure and stuff like that. So he's quarreling with it. And that sort of dance around technologies of character seems to me part of that like career-wide quarrel with the form of the novel that he both cherishes and also is not particularly complacent about. And I think talking bad about his forms of characterization is both, with Pynchon says whatever's fair, like you get to do that. But I think there's different ways of imagining it. And for me, those have to do with like his sense of what the novel is, which is as a form he loves, but that's not an innocent form, not something he just wants to inherit blankly. So anyway, that's my minor polemic about that.
Do you remember the scene in Against the Day where Cyprian Latewood is crossing the mountains with another guy like into Greece or something, and it's not like they get along, but they only like they have such a long journey. The only thing they can do is talk, to pass the time. And then when they get to where they're going, and he delivers the person to their cousin, Cyprian has like such an enormous sense of what this other guy was about, and he's like, "Oh, I meets the cousin. It's, I've heard so much about you," and he genuinely feels this connection. I thought that was wonderful in that.
Yeah, it's very it's a moving passage. There's a scene, like there's a knock on Pynchon, which is a totally real one that I don't think is I think is mostly right, that like he is capable of producing male intimacy in a way he's not female intimacy, and I think that's mostly right. There is in Vineland, however, a beautiful, beautiful passage between Prairie and her teenage friend Che. Remember when she runs away for a while to visit her high school friend, and they shoplift together?
Oh, yes.
And that's when we have the memory of the great South Coast Plaza eyeshadow raid, which is a truly, truly wonderful moment. And that's one of those scenes where I think his capacity to produce intimacy, not just among middle-aged men, shows itself somewhat, though mostly in its after effects in DL and Frenesy, but definitely in Prairie and her friend Che. Also, such a great name, Prairie. Such a lastingly great name, Prairie Gates.
Yeah, and I forget who it was in the Pynchon's California collection who pointed out that her link to America via that name. I thought, oh, I hadn't thought of that before. That's great.
Yeah, it's very there's a lot to like. I find myself very attached to Prairie, not only because she was born approximately 1 year before I was, and she was involved in the same sort of music scenes in 1984.
Nice. What are some of your other favorite Pynchon names? I mean, there's just so many.
Oh my God, there's no end of it. I mean, obviously the thing like the names that just sort of slayed me when you don't expect to see them coming, like what's the name of the guy who becomes the Marquis de Sade? Oh wait, that's right. The Marquis de Sade has a wife named Blodwyn. And just for whatever reason, like in the storm of sentences that produced the passage about the Marquis de Sade, and that's SOD. It's a lawn care agency run by a reader of forbidden books. His wife is Blodwyn, who specializes in costumes. That stuff like that it's just too good. That sort of like detuning of Dickensian names,
Starting with a B, Dr. Blatnoid. I've had a lot of appreciation.
Oh, that's right.
Someone just
Doctor of Japonica, yeah.
Because Blatnoy in Russian means criminal. And also, like I rewatched it again, and then weirdly the next day someone posted on Facebook nothing about Pynchon, but talking about that term in Russian, and I was like,
that's fantastic.
And then like it also gives the whole reference to the giant adenoid, and I was just like, oh
yeah,
great.
I will say like the movie of Inherent Vice was, I thought, quite good. Like those are not easy novels to turn into movies, and I thought it definitely got like its antic quality, its quality of pervasive dread. Like I thought it did extraordinarily well at like it understood the textures of that novel in a way that I thought was remarkable and very pleasing.
Yeah, I really enjoyed. I love the soundtrack too. That was really
Yeah.
well done.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, even now for the press, they asked me to do a playlist for
Oh,
this
nice.
for my book about Vineland. So it's leaning heavy toward California. You know, it's going to definitely start with California Uber Alles, and then we'll see where we go. You know, it'll have Finesse in it. It'll have it'll have
Excellent.
definitely have some mid '80s trash punk in it as well.
So when is your book out?
My book is out. I don't really know because the pandemic has been sort of weird. Like it's copyright is 2020, so I'm expecting it in my hands at any time. I think its official pub date has got to be in January, but of course it just depends on when your local store can get it to you. So hopefully by January there it'll be. I have a couple more like radio and in-store events sort of thing in the fall, but you know, I will say it was just a pleasure. I'm very grateful to the folks at Columbia University Press because I'm very grateful to get to spend, you know, 50,000 words or whatever inside this book that you loved and trying to make that love both critical and lively, but also available to other people who might be interested without having to be fucking academics or anything like that. So that was a pleasure to get to do.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you for talking to me about Pynchon. Thank you for reading. I appreciate it more than I can tell you.
Awesome.